All right. Welcome, everybody. I'm going to kick us off because it's 1:04 and we have a lot of stuff to get through today. First, on behalf of the team, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today. This workshop is called Enhancing Marine Aquaculture in the Tropical U.S. Methods for Sustainable Commercial Co-cultivation of Shellfish and Seaweed in Florida. So if you're on the wrong Zoom, you can depart now. I hope that the title though encouraged you that you are in the right place. And we have a really full lineup. We're honored today to have some really good experts in the field joining us on this call. As a reminder, this workshop is simply to provide an overview of a recently funded NOAA project. It's funded through Saltonstall-Kennedy to the PIs, Dr. Aaron Welch and Dr. Loretta Roberson. They are both here and will be speaking to us more formally. But just to let you know, this workshop today is to give you a little background on their funded project and also provide a little bit of context on some of the seaweed culture and activities that are going on elsewhere within the United States currently. So we're going to have a few presentations from some of the experts. Loretta and Aaron will give you a more detailed background on their particular project and research objectives. And then at the end, we're going to have a facilitated panel discussion. And so we're really excited also to have Anushka Conception with us and Portia Sapp and Charlie Culpepper. I will give more formal introductions to them as we move forward. But Anushka is actually very well acquainted with the seaweed aquaculture, and she's an aquaculture extension specialist currently with Connecticut Sea Grant, and her focus is on seaweed aquaculture. So I do think that Anushka can provide a lot of context as well, and she provides a lot of consultations within the industry in the Northeast region of the U.S. Portia Sapp is the Director of Aquaculture at the Florida Department of Agriculture and Consumer Services. This is the department in Florida that's responsible for managing aquaculture in the state. And Charlie Culpepper is the Assistant Division Director at the Division of Aquaculture at FDAC. So we believe that these two will provide a lot of context on the regulatory side of things as well. So in addition to our speakers, our panelists will help us provide some of that great feedback during the panel discussion when we can take more integrated questions from the audience. I'll remind you, as I know that in Zoom world, we're all very familiar now with how it works, but please remember to keep your mics muted and don't accidentally share your screen if you don't mean to. But otherwise, if you need anything, you can message me privately in the chat or message all of us in the chat, however you feel you need to move forward. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Dr. Aaron Welch with 2Dock Shellfish and Dr. Loretta Roberson with Woods Hole. And I'll kind of let those two kick us off here with a little bit of an overview.
Laura, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Aaron. And thank you, Angela. This is really great to have this opportunity to discuss this and talk about opportunities for Florida. So I'll just go ahead and start. Here we go. Can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Perfect.
Great. So basically, I'm going to talk about the seaweed project that we have going both in Florida, Puerto Rico, and Belize. But basically, we want to look at all the opportunities that seaweed cultivation provides. And, some of the applications are nutraceuticals, cosmetics, fresh food, processed foods, livestock feed, fertilizer or soil conditioners, and biofuels. And our partners in Belize have been cultivating this Euchema isoforme that's related to species that are grown in Southeast Asia and Tanzania on a larger scale for carrageenan, but focusing here more on the smaller scale cultivation as we build up the industry, and then highlight some of the potential ecosystem services these farms might provide or will provide in addition, which include removing excess nutrients, providing habitat for important species like lobsters and fish, removing carbon, and then potentially protecting from waves. And so this work is funded by the U.S. Department of Energy. And oops, can you see that? There we go. So the ARPA-E Mariner program, and they're interested in having seaweed farming be used as a climate change solution and produce sustainable biofuels. But we know we can improve water quality through removal of CO2, nitrogen, sedimentation. We can produce valuable bioproducts and reconnect habitats and protect nursery spaces. We're also part of the Ancient Mariner team, and that is the Alaska Northeast Caribbean Initiative for Energy Technology and the Macroalgae Research Inspiring Novel Energy Resources. But the ARPA-E program really wants it to be scalable, economical, and resilient. We have a lot of partners on this project to cover everything from, monitoring how these farms are impacting the environment, doing modeling to understand where the nutrients are coming and going. We work with farm site teams, including Erin in Florida with 2 Dock Shellfish, and other partners for our various sites. And we are definitely interested in technology transfer and outreach and helping support and develop the seaweed farming industry in all these areas in the Caribbean and Gulf of Mexico. So we're also looking at a variety of species, as most of these species have not been grown commercially before. So we kind of have to start from ground zero and understand the biology and how they grow, what are the good conditions they grow in, how does it impact their composition in terms of that either carrageenan agar content or carbon and nutrient removal, et cetera. And so that's some of the basic research we're doing here at the MBL and with partners like you'll hear from Charlie Yarosh at UConn, et cetera. So what do our systems look like for growing seaweed? Well, we have several and, sort of in phases. And this was in an attempt to help the governing agencies really understand the gear that we're using, and also for us to test the gear and the sites and the biology. So we started with a smaller system, and that's just a 5-line spreader bar. And this is a system that we have deployed in Florida with Erin. And he can talk to you a little bit more about how easy it is to deploy the system. But it's essentially 5 grow lines that are 200 feet long, and they have a solid spreader bar at each end to keep them separated. And they just have 2 surface buoys to keep the system afloat, and then 2 anchors at 1 anchor at each end to keep it in. From there, we go up to what we see a more working farm design, and that's the catenary array. And we're testing this currently in Puerto Rico, but we would love to do it in Florida as well. So this one is now, you see we have 4 corner buoys. They're variable displacement spar buoys that are meant to be able to raise and lower the farm in protection from storms. And we have 2 anchors per buoy, and then right here in this drawing, we show 66 grow lines. So that's 60 meters long by 33 meters wide. And it keeps the seaweed, and whether it's, the red seaweeds or kelp, the sugar kelp in that bottom image, we can keep it around, say, 10 feet below the surface of the water and keep everything under tension. And as an example, a larger system that was deployed or has been deployed in Kodiak, Alaska with our partners at the University of Alaska and WHOI and Greenwave, who are here on the call with us today. And that's been really successful out there. From there, the vision, at least for the DOE, is to go even larger scale. And so they want to have at least a minimum 1,000-hectare farm design. And our vision is to have it be made of that same basic catenary design as the individual module, just larger, now 300-meter grow lines by 50 meters. But then we put these in arrays, say 5 by 4, that then can be dispersed throughout and spaced in such a way that they're not impacting each other in terms of, currents or nutrient removal, et cetera. And just these are some of the tools that we're using at the sites to better understand how the farm system is functioning and impacting the currents and the state of the algae. So, monitoring waves and currents. We also use things like the sound trap to understand when marine mammals are interacting with the farm and our gear. And then using other tools like hyperspectral imaging to look at the state of the seaweed, and then autonomous vehicles that can look at what organisms are associated with the farm, because we've seen that even when we have no seaweed growing on the farm, fish are already attracted and other organisms. So what type of, how are we increasing the biodiversity there? And then this is just some details about the actual components and the key components for making a stable system. So first we have these anchors in collaboration with Tend Ocean, and that's Cliff Gowdy. For our catenary array, we have the 200-pound anchors. So 2 of those on each buoy, and they're just very efficient and easy to set. And once you set them, they hold on really, really well. The second, I mentioned these variable displacement spar buoys. So they're designed to have a airspace that's constantly at the top of the buoy, but the lower space we can empty or fill with air to raise or lower the farm as we need to. And it can be either for storm operations or even for things like going deeper to take advantage of some cooler water or where there might be more nutrients. And then lastly, one of the key things is for these systems is to keep them really tight and under tension at all times. So we don't have negative interactions with marine life. And so we use these dead-eye tensioners on the anchor lines to really help us keep everything tight. And, they work really, really well. And then I'll end on just the sort of analysis that we did in terms of suitable areas for growing seaweeds. And this is based on, conflict of use, but also things like the depth, so between 10 meters and 100 meters, and temperature wise, et cetera. So we have, 27 million hectares available within that Southeast and Gulf of Mexico area. So I think there's a lot of opportunity to grow things here. So on that, I will end it and hand it off to Aaron.
Thanks, Loretta. So I'm going to hold off on my presentation until after some of the other speakers have had a chance to go. But I thought I'd just start off really quick talking about the Saltonstall-Kennedy grant in particular that Loretta and I are working on. I started farming shellfish about 10 years ago, and pretty much from day one, I learned that seaweed was going to be a part of my life, whether I wanted it to be or not. Here in Florida, especially on the Gulf Coast, shellfish leases deal with seasonal blooms of marine macroalgae every winter. And so for years, we just fought the algae, tried to keep it off our clam beds, tried to keep it off our gear. And over time, we started really thinking about, how we were spending all this time and money and energy keeping algae off the lease. And it started to occur to us that this stuff wasn't just a nuisance, that it was a potentially valuable product. And we started thinking about ways to not just move it off the leases, but to put it to work. I got to go know Loretta through some contacts at the University of Miami, and we started working together. Loretta got us involved in the DOE grant that she just described. And Loretta and I started talking about, using shellfish leases in Florida for more than just sort of monoculture of clams or oysters. How could we put that whole 3D water column to work, producing things that were both, financially profitable and environmentally sustainable? And we put together the proposal, which is this, now this grant we're working on now, which is, trying to find ways to co-culture shellfish, sunray Venus clams and hard clams, as well as native species of seaweed. And so we've been collaborating on this SK grant together for about a year. Loretta was just down here with Scott Lindell Monday and Tuesday, getting to know Tampa Bay and all of the aquatic organisms that live in it. And so we're working, and we will be continuing to work for the next 12 to 18 months on this idea of using shellfish farms on the Gulf Coast of Florida to produce both, viable seaweed products as well as shellfish. We've got a bunch of speakers that are going to talk to some of the larger parts of the industry, some of the issues and things like that. And then I'll follow up at the end of that with a little bit about, where our little company and our partners see seaweed in Florida and where we think it could go and what we need to do to get there. So with that, Angela, I'll turn it back over to you and we can move forward with the next speaker.
Okay, fantastic. Thanks, Aaron. Yeah, okay, so I'll just get right into it. Dr. Charlie Yerish is here with us today from the University of Connecticut. And one of the things that's really so exciting about seaweed is the potential for this nutrient bioextraction and the environmental benefits that seaweed culture can provide. And that's almost exactly the title of his talk, I believe. And I'm just going to go ahead and toss the mic to Dr. Yerish from the University of Connecticut. Thanks for being here today.
Well, thank you, Angela. What I'd like to do is introduce all to seaweed aquaculture, and also just to let you know that the area that I'm talking about was actually first proposed in 1991 to the US EPA, but nobody was really interested in seaweeds at that time other than get it off your beach, and that was it. However, through time and better understanding what the needs are of coastal managers, we put together a program on seaweed aquaculture in Long Island Sound. Long Island Sound's over almost 130 miles long, has a opening to the Block Island Zone, Atlantic Ocean. To the western end of Long Island Sound, you have the New York metropolitan area, where you have a watershed of over 8 million people impacting Long Island Sound. When we take a look at the problems that we have in the region, it all has to stem back to nutrients, principally nitrogen. And I had requested from the US EPA to give it a chance if we can use nutrient bioextraction to actually mitigate the nutrients in Long Island Sound. And this nutrient bioextraction includes both seaweeds and shellfish. And so when we look at nutrient bioextraction, how does it work? Cultivation of both groups of organisms there. These organisms are picking up nutrients and organic nutrients, such as nitrate and ammonium, from the water for the seaweeds, and for the shellfish, organically bound nutrients. So different nutrient pools. And we can remove the biomass, and you remove the biomass, then you're removing the nutrients from the ecosystem. As I mentioned before, the number one problem in Long Island Sound has to do with too much nutrients as you proceed west into Long Island Sound, going towards New York. So the area that is in red, these are areas that have frequent hypoxic events in the New York metro area. And those areas include to the far west in New York is the East River. And hypoxic events take place every year. And as you're going eastward, you have less nutrients in Long Island Sound, so there is not a problem there. So why was nutrient bioextraction being conducted in Long Island Sound? We were able to convince the Long Island Sound study of the US EPA. Also we were able to convince the Department of Environmental Protection in New York City and the state of Connecticut's Department of Energy and the Environment, and the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. And we basically said to them, look, we have another tool in the toolbox that if you give us an opportunity to show you what seaweeds can do, and then we've also done it with shellfish there, this will be important for coastal managers. And if we take a look at sources of nitrogen pollution, we have wastewater treatment plants. They're doing an excellent job now in Long Island Sound. They've reached their TMDLs. But we have these non-point sources, agriculture and lawn going down to the river systems. And then we have something that is called atmospheric deposition. These are very large inputs to Long Island Sound, and they're adding to the nutrient loading. So growing seaweeds and shellfish extracts nutrients. And we've had a lot of sponsors and participants there, just to mention some of the ones, including the US EPA, the Sea Grant programs, NOAA, and so forth. When we take a look at nitrogen and phosphorus in the region there, notice that we never go down to zero on nitrogen in our Western Long Island Sound region. In Long Island Sound itself, as you're moving to the central and areas, you do go down to zero as you're going into the spring and summer months. In part, that's after the phytoplankton blooms there. And the same thing takes place with phosphorus. We have fairly high levels, but nitrogen is limiting. So we were given the opportunity to set up 3 experimental farms. And these farms were set up for the first time in the city of New York's history in East River and in Long Island Sound, in an area in the western end of the Sound, Fairfield, Connecticut, and then in central Long Island Sound, we in an area, our archipelago of islands called the Thimble Island Oyster Farm, that was owned by a friend, Brent Smith, who eventually founded Green Wave Organization. And so we looked at species to grow. We focused on Gracilaria. We felt that was a good warm temperate crop. It had the right profile for when it would grow, June through October. If it's a warmer spring, you get started in late April and May. And Gracilaria does have commercial value, and that's also important. You don't want to grow something that is economically not important, and Gracilaria is in demand globally for agar production. Also in some areas there where you can grow Gracilaria, if it's edible, it can be used as limu. And we've characterized all aspects of the Gracilaria farms. I call your attention to an excellent book that we put together, open source, readily available. It's a cultivation manual, how to grow seaweeds. First time that was done, and we felt that was important. But in order to go out to an open water farm, you have to be able to grow it. A nursery, we had a land-based nursery system. We start off in small little test tubes, go to big jugs, then we go to 4,000 liter tanks and use that to give us an opportunity to grow, to seed our long lines. And what I like to do is show people the picture to the left. These are the grow lines of Gracilaria, small little 20-gram bundles. You come back in 2 weeks and you get bundles that are well over 1 kilo a piece. We've had growth rates of over 16.5% per day in the western end of Long Island Sound, the East River, and we've had up to 1,700 pounds plus of the Gracilaria. Also notice that we don't have any fouling organisms on our Gracilaria, and that really surprised many of our coastal managers. We picked the right spot, the sweet spot for growing the Gracilaria and not other organisms. And that was very important. So if you look at nitrogen removal, the ecosystem services there, we look at the Bronx there, notice that maximum growth, maximum nitrogen removal is in early summer, July, going into August. Where you have nitrogen removal depends upon the amount of nitrogen in the environment. So as you go to the west, higher nitrogen removal, go to the east, less nitrogen removal, and it varies by site and season. And all this has been published in many journals. So we also decided to lay out a hypothetical farm using long lines. Today, I would use some of the catenary systems that have been developed by Tend Ocean. But if we look at the nitrogen removal there on our hectare farm in Gracilaria, in these different regions, notice that there's a significant amount of nitrogen removal from these farms. And this is important Now, how much of the area of Long Island Sound can you grow Gracilaria? We did some estimates. We did some GIS work in Long Island Sound, and we laid out there the plans for future growth of Gracilaria in our region. And you'd be able to do the same thing along the coast of Florida as well, both the East Coast, West Coast, and also in areas where you have lagoonal systems there. And if we look at our nutrient bioextraction potential, not only do you have nitrogen removal, there is also carbon removal. And that is important because there you can have an impact on increasing the pH as the seaweeds grow. They're removing CO2 from the water. The green bars happens to deal with the other species that we were working with, which is the sugar kelp. But for Gracilaria, we had significant removal of both nitrogen and carbon dioxide. How does that compare to other organisms like oysters and mussels? This is a comparison there. And if you look over an annual period there, the seaweeds compare very nicely to shellfish. And this is important because nutrient bioextraction includes both seaweeds and shellfish doing their ecosystem services. And important is really being able to publish the work, and we published our work. We also made open source documents on how to cultivate seaweeds, red seaweeds, brown seaweeds, and this is the first time that was readily available. We even have YouTube videos for people who don't want to read manuals. The US EPA back in 1991 really didn't want to give us a chance to use aquaculture techniques to do what I suggested, but in 2010, we were able to get the support of a number of different agencies. And in 2013, the US EPA basically gave us the best designation you can get, which was a shout out in their annual report. Growing seaweeds is good for the environment, extracting nitrogen, CO2, and of course, you want to be able to have an economic crop. Now, one thing that I still feel that is important is getting seaweeds and shellfish involved in nitrogen trading programs. Connecticut has a nitrogen trading program. As you're going into the western end of the sound, where you have a pound of nitrogen having a greater impact that has a certain value. And so we did some estimates about including seaweeds like Gracilaria in a nitrogen trading program. And this would be very significant for our growers. If you could do this for shellfish, this also would be significant. And so I'm not familiar if right now Florida is considering a nitrogen trading program or a carbon trading program, but this is a great opportunity to give our farmers, both seaweed farmers and shellfish, an extra opportunity to get awards for their ecosystem services. Now, the last thing I'd like to mention is that the Mariner program, Mariner, as you've seen from the introduction by Loretta, has many different projects there, projects that are involved in enhancement for designing and experimenting with different technologies for growing systems there, breeding systems there, deploying monitoring technologies. Well, we can bring the Mariner program to bear on growing seaweeds in the coastal waters of Florida. And ultimately, as I said before, you want to be able to actually have the value besides ecosystem services. We have the opportunity when you grow certain types of seaweeds, they can be used for food, bioactive compounds, hydrocolloids like augars, minerals. And so when we look at seaweed cultivation, we're really looking at making sure there's no waste in a biorefinery. And this biorefinery concept is now playing out in seaweed aquaculture in North America, as well as in Western Europe. And so when we take a look at what's going Well, hopefully this gives you the opportunities for nutrient bioextraction technologies. Originally, we were told you couldn't do it in the coastal waters of New York City, but we did it. And this really opens up the stage for using seaweed and aquaculture to let the public understand there are ecosystem services that your farmers are providing. So let's give them an additional source of income, include them in nutrient trading programs, nitrogen, and in the future, carbon. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Dr. Yarish. And the timing was perfect too, because a lot of the folks on this call might have been aware of the restoration aquaculture workshop that took place in Florida at the beginning of October. And a lot of our industry partners are very interested in moving forward with the potential for things like you just spoke of in that presentation. So thank you for that. We are going to hold questions until the panel discussion. So for those of you in the audience who might be wanting to ask a question, write it down. You can also stick it in the chat or independently write chat the speaker if you want to ask them right away. But we will take verbal questions closer to the end. I'd like to next introduce Dr. Scott Lindell. He's a research specialist in marine farming at Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution, and he will be talking a little bit about sea vegetable farming. And Scott, I'll go ahead and let you take it away next.
Thanks. I'm trying to share a full screen here. Just thinking about it. Can you see that?
Beautiful.
Okay, great. Well, thank you. Yes, I'm Scott Lindell, research specialist here at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institution. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about a case study project that Charlie Yarish put me up to over a decade ago, where we were multi-cropping grassolaria with oysters in Wacoit Bay, not far from Woods Hole. Just for orientation, Wacoit Bay's here just off of the Vineyard Sound in southern New England. Looks something like a snowman here in our study site, blown up right here. We planted one 100-meter long line away from the oyster cages and one around oyster cages here. And I think Charlie gave a pretty good introduction about grassolaria and its use as a potential commercial product. We started with Charlie's help and Dr. Kim too, John Kim, with cultures that we had collected around Wacoit Bay. They took them back to their lab, isolated them, made sure that they were the preferred species, not the invasive species. And we grew them up in these they grew them up in initially nursery systems. We continued that in large K-wall tanks and produced a fair bit of biomass from between the tanks and some outdoor tanks to begin our stocking of the farm. So our objectives were purely agronomic to start with. We wanted to compare the growth rate of these the grassolaria planted near the oysters and away from the oysters to see if there was any synergistic effects. We wanted to compare the optimal depth, 0.2 meters versus 0.6 meters, compare the spacing of the plants, whether 10 centimeter spacing or 20 centimeter spacing. These were 20-gram bundles, as Charlie had prescribed, and compare the costs and benefits of harvesting and replanting every 2 weeks or every 4 weeks. So this is a sort of a representative view of our experimental grassolaria farm. You can see we could vary the depth of the lines if we wanted to, and this is the kind of spacing we would provide for the bundles. We had some weights to sort of keep the grassolaria down and floats to keep it up. So I'll jump right to the results. The one of the key things we discovered was that 20 centimeter spacing grew slightly faster than 10 centimeters, but we figured you'd really need to double your yield to make it worthwhile, and it was not. So there was just a very slight difference at both the north and the south lines. We found that 2-week-old bundles grew significantly faster than the 4-week-old bundles. Note the growth rates here are 7 or 9% on average. So we were getting good growth rates to begin with, and that also wasn't very different on either side of the north or the south line. We concluded that at least at the scale that we were growing the grassolaria, in the scale of the oyster farming, we didn't see a benefit necessarily to the seaweed of growing the grassolaria near the oysters or not. This graph sort of summarizes the environmental factors, with temperature being the warmest, very close to where we started in late June with our planting, and dropping from there out. Day length, the purple triangles here, growing or staying pretty steady early on and dropping off, of course. I'm sorry, I got that wrong. That's temperature, and day length is the steady line. And you can see that we started out with terrific growth rates, probably because we started with nursery grown plants or material that was replete with nutrients. And our growth rate slowly dropped off to about 4 or 5% toward the end of the season into October, as temperature and day length also declined. And as Charlie alluded, fouling was our biggest enemy. And we found the longer that we cultivated, the more every 2 or 4 weeks, we would take material back to our lab, split it, and plant it back out again. And so there was always a chance of carrying propagules back to the field site and having them continue to grow. So while 2 weeks harvesting helped us be able to keep things cleaner, it wasn't good enough to prevent all fouling. So we conducted some freshwater treatment trials late in the season with 2 different treatments, 15-minute freshwater bath once a week or 15-minute freshwater bath twice a week. And then we also had some controls where we didn't treat them at all. And basically we found that after 8 weeks, the 2-week, twice-a-week treatment was pretty effective. We didn't see any tunicates. The once-a-week treatment was somewhat effective, but we did see an occasional tunicate. But the control obviously was a total loss with lots and lots of tunicates that were not going to be marketable, at least for a food market. And we suffered about a 10 to 20% hit with slower growth with the handling and the freshwater treatments. Just to continue on the theme of nutrient bioextraction as a potential reason to harvest grassolaria, we see here that over the course of a season, under our actual conditions, we only harvested about 130 kilograms per 100-meter line. But under the best agronomic practices, if we employed all those, we'd be nearly 900 kilograms of grassolaria, which is equivalent of about 2.3 kilograms of nitrogen based on our analysis. So a 1 hectare idealized farm with 33 lines spaced 3 meters apart could remove about 76 kilograms of nitrogen per season. And that's about equivalent to about 200,000 oysters, which could be grown on a similar hectare basis. But you need to have a market or figure out something to do with that 28,000 kilograms of grassolaria that you would harvest from a hectare. So our conclusions were that grassolaria is indeed a good species for nutrient bioextraction, and co-culture, as Aaron noted, it's all over shellfish farms here in the Northeast as well as in Florida. The freshwater treatments reduced the fouling problem, and we were successful in working with a specialty vegetable and produce buyer to open up markets in New York City. We were selling grassolaria for a while there for $16, $20 a pound. And they were taking all we could harvest. And I'll just thank the Woods Hole Sea Grant for providing the funding and these associated institutions. Thank you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Scott. Next up, we've got a couple of folks from industry representatives, and also, so we've got Greenwave on the call, as well as Mike Dole, who's the director for bivalve restoration and aquaculture at Stony Brook University. We've also got Kendall Barbary and Lindsay Olson from Greenwave, who are going to be speaking to us. So Kendall, I'll go ahead and toss the mic to you and let you take it first.
All right, thank you so much. And let me pull up my screen here. Okay, you can see the slide deck, I hope. All right, so I am Kendall Barbary. As you mentioned, I'm the Director of Partnerships and Program Development at Greenwave. I'm kind of standing in for our Director of Training and Support, Lindsay Olson, who's also on the call, but in transit to lead a training program in Cordova, Alaska for this weekend. So Greenwave is a nonprofit organization. We're a bi-coastal nonprofit headquartered in New Haven, Connecticut, and we have a mission to train and support regenerative ocean farmers in the era of climate change. So we're working mostly with people growing seaweed, but also a lot of people growing seaweed and shellfish. We got our start, as Charlie mentioned back in his presentation, when he and our co-founder, Bryn Smith, got together and started kind of testing out cultivation strategies for sugar kelp on Bryn's Long Island Sound, Thimble Island oyster farm site way back in 2011 and 2012. So kind of a combination of that work, and at the time, Bryn being impacted on his farm site where he's growing oysters, and he was heavily impacted by hurricanes Irene and Sandy, and then started to realize not only are there lots of benefits and opportunities associated with culturing macroalgae, in this case, sugar kelp, there are lots of environmental benefits, and there are lots of economic opportunities as well. So this sort of simplified diagram that I have here is really to introduce and stress the kind of importance and opportunities of the ways that you can bring different species together. But the way this actually takes shape is pretty site specific. It varies from farm to farm, based on the site and the scale of the operations and so forth. Over the past several years since we were founded in 2014, we've really kind of developed more expertise around those brown macroalgae. So we're predominantly working with people growing kelps and providing some training, support, and expertise around culturing of those species. So at this time, we don't have a lot of that expertise for the seaweeds that may be or could be cultured in Gulf states in the Southeast US, but maybe we will get there at some point. We think we can sort of shed some light, at least on the sort of framework and the way that we operate and what we see in our areas. So just kind of speaking to the different sort of size and shape of operations and how things look in different places, I'm hoping that this might kind of come through on your end. But you got to see a few of the diagrams in Loretta's presentation and Charlie's presentation and Scott's presentation for like different types of array systems and ways that people are culturing seaweed. So that can range from single line systems to the 5-line arrays that were at the beginning of this video shot, and to more complex, larger scale multi-line array systems. So there's really a range of technologies, a range of kind of infrastructure that's needed. Here you see kind of Mike Dole wading through a shallow water site on the south side of Long Island that's also used for culturing oysters. A site in Alaska that occupies about 20 acres, but the farmed area is around 3 acres, where you have this multi-line catenary array designed to increase the productivity on a small footprint and maximize the revenue that can be generated there. So there are lots of different types of farms. I'm not going to dig in too deep today. I'm not going to like full overview over these farm systems, but just want to give you a slice of kind of what we're working on. And then I'll turn the mic over in just a moment to Mike Dole to support. But before I do that, just sharing that, one of the things that we've worked on for the past few years is distilling our knowledge and expertise into an online platform that is accessible to people, across the states and actually around the world. So we've developed the Regenerative Ocean Farming Hub. It's a free seed to sale resource for ocean farmers. The topics do really focus on those brown macroalgae, the kelps, that we're working with in New England, Gulf of Maine, West Coast, and Alaska. And this hub has a training curriculum with over 30 courses and 80 how-to videos. It's got interactive farm design tools where you can sort of run through a few different scenarios and figure out how different site factors impact, anchor design and so forth, for a couple of the array styles that were discussed in the previous presentations, including the single line and 5-line array. But in the community space, where we have, over 3,000 users right now on our online hub from over 60 countries, we actually have pretty good representation from the Southeast US, and people who are pretty interested in culturing warm water species, and looking at co-culture as well. So the community is a place where people are coming together to sort of ask and answer technical questions, meet one another, and discuss different topics of interest. It's arranged around, farm design, hatchery technologies, industry news and science, and all sorts of interesting things. So you can access the hub by going to hub.greenwave.org. I encourage you to take a look and join that community space. But I think next what I wanted to do is just turn the floor over to somebody who we've worked with very closely over the past few years, to provide some training support and sort of technology transfer to our friends on Long Island. So we've been working very closely with Mike Dole. He's the Associate Director of Shellfish Restoration and Aquaculture at Stony Brook University. He's also, at this point, a seaweed and shellfish farmer, but has farmed clams and oysters, both for restoration and commercial purposes for some time. So we started working together with Mike a few years ago to provide some of the training support and resources so that he could then extend that to more shellfish growers on Long Island. So I'm looking forward to answering some questions in a little bit, I hope. But for now, I'll turn it over and let him share a little bit of his most direct farmer perspective. Mike?
Yeah, thanks, Kendall. Let me get my screen up. Okay. There we go. All right, so yeah, thank you, Kendall, and thank you, Loretta, for inviting me to speak a little today. But as Kendall mentioned, I'm the Associate Director for Shellfish Restoration and Aquaculture at Stony Brook, and I've really spent most of my career involved with shellfish, and particularly aspects of shellfish restoration. I'm a restoration practitioner, and I've spent the better part of the last 20 plus years building hard clam spawner sanctuaries and the science and the monitoring that go on with that, as long as working with oysters and oyster reefs. And it was sometime, I guess in the mid 2000s, I was working on oyster restoration projects in New York Harbor. And I was doing some studies growing oysters in cages when I had the epiphany that oysters and aquaculture provide a lot of the same ecosystem services as they do in nature and shellfish restoration. And it's an idea that kind of just grabbed my mind and thinking about it. And it was kind of my first, when I first started thinking about restorative aquaculture, although we didn't call it that back then. That's a much newer term for me. And also the idea that you could make a living doing this, right? And so you can have an independent life on the water, growing shellfish and making money and having this economic benefit, and at the same time doing something really good for the environment. And I became really passionate about this idea until I actually started an oyster farm in 2008. And my oyster farm grew over time. I had a successful business, and somewhere along the way, I realized that I was only growing oysters, and I started thinking a lot about diversifying and crop diversification. You know, if there was ever an industry specific problem with oysters, you know, whether it be a market dynamic and the price drops, or if there's some sort of environmental catastrophe, disease, harmful algae bloom, or something that would affect the oyster crop, I was pretty much out of business. That was my only thing, was growing oysters. And I was pretty much my business is emblematic of aquaculture on Long Island, even to date. So Long Island, where we we have a beautiful island surrounded by a number of estuaries, and there's a number of aquaculture programs surrounding Long Island. So there's some statistics over here on the left, but there's about 51 small farms. You know, these are all small owner operated farms for the most part, with less than 10 employees. But the one thing in common is everybody's growing nothing but oysters. There is the whole industry in New York is oysters. So this idea of crop diversification was really on my mind a lot. And, sometime I put the year 2011 up, but I was visiting with a friend up in Maine who was also growing oysters. And he pointed out to me some people that had just started growing kelp in Maine. And I was very intrigued by this idea. I had no idea why they were growing kelp, or I knew nothing about it, but just the fact that they were growing something else I found very intriguing. And short after that, I heard of a person named Brent Smith, who was growing it even much closer to home in Connecticut. And again, very intrigued that this was happening right here. I'll jump forward a few years after that, but as Kendall had mentioned, I got to meet Bren probably around 2017, years later, and thanks to Bren and the folks at Greenwave, they're the ones that taught me how to grow kelp, and which I've been has really been a big part of my work for the last 5 years, and sharing that knowledge and technology to farmers on Long Island. But why kelp? Why was that so intriguing? Why seaweed and not another shellfish crop? And I have to say, for me, the first thing that really caught my attention about kelp is it has an opposite growing season from oysters. Now, this is something that might not be relevant down in Florida and in tropical regions. I'm under the impression that there really is no seasonality and everything's just growing all the time year round. But, in the Northeast, shellfish go kind of dormant in the winter, and the work for an oyster farmer becomes a lot less during the winter. Really it's just harvesting, but you don't have to keep up with biofouling or tumbling the oysters or cleaning cages or anything like that. So there's a lot of downtime, and to be able to shift gears in the cold months over to a new crop, is a very intriguing idea. You can divert your resources, your boat, your labor, from shellfish, from oysters in the warm months to seaweed in the cold months. And, I would have a lot of seasonal employees. And so the thought of having seasonal employees and keeping them year round was very intriguing. Also the fact that, being that we're dealing with the 3D space, that we can vertically integrate seaweeds with shellfish, and we don't have to replace one crop for another. So we have additive revenue streams, unlike, farming on a 2D surface on land, where you might have to replace your, tomatoes with, cucumbers or whatever it be. But we can integrate this all together in 3 days. So it's additive revenue streams, not replacing. Also, I became fascinated with all the different potential markets for kelp. When you, as an oyster farmer, I'm pretty much dealing with one market, right? And that's the food market. And even like a subsegment of the food market, it's really mostly getting sold into the half shell raw market. And so, with seaweeds, just really opens up market diversity, as well as crop diversification. There's market diversification. And so I found that really intriguing. And, it really became evident how important this was during the COVID pandemic, when a lot of restaurants closed and we lost that half shell market pretty much. And to be able to have other markets, maybe to keep a business going through tough times like that, was very, very, also very intriguing to me. And then combine that all with the fact that it's another extractive species, another zero input crop, that has this restorative function of nutrient bioextraction. And so a really nice complement to oysters in that way too. So, for a lot of good, sound business reasons, it made a lot of sense to add seaweed, and in particular kelp, to my farm. Except in New York, there was no path forward. And to date, there still has not been any commercial seaweed farming in New York. So New York is very behind the 8 ball compared to other states in the Northeast. The reason being, there is no regulatory structure in place yet for seaweed cultivation, but it's coming. And in fact, I think this will be the first year where there's actually going to be permits issued for commercial kelp cultivation in New York. But I didn't, let that stop my interest in seaweed and passion for it. And it's really become a big focus of the research I've done at Stony Brook University since 2017, and haven't met Greenwave. And and over the course of this research, a lot of things have emerged, which I never even thought about as an oyster farmer. And this is just one thing, a recent study from the lab I'm working with, in the lab of Dr. Chris Gobler, but just looking at the impacts of growing seaweed on the local water chemistry, and in particular pH. And as these seaweeds are doing photosynthesis and sucking up carbon dioxide, it's having an impact, a measurable impact on the localized water quality around the seaweed, where there's small increases in pH. And we've measured this with continuous sensors that we put in the field, which you can see in the picture on the right here, where we've put these in these sondes directly in seaweed lines, outside seaweed lines, different distances. And not only that, we've measured growth of oysters inside seaweed and outside seaweed, and have found a significant increase in oyster growth when they're growing in seaweed than outside. So there's other benefits to an oyster farmer of possibly adding seaweeds, and these benefits to oyster growth. Other research going on in our lab is looking at interactions of macroalgae with harmful algae, microalgae blooms. And we also are finding a protective zone around seaweeds against harmful algae. One thing that would be really interesting that we found is with the red tides Alexandrium, which produce a toxin which can shut down mussel fisheries and other shell fisheries. When mussels are grown with kelp, we've measured significantly lower toxin accumulation in the presence of Alexandrium. And that's because it appears these harmful algae cells are lysing in the presence of macroalgae. And I won't get into the mechanisms behind that, but adding seaweeds to the general point here is adding seaweeds to shellfish farms can have a real lot of growth benefits. And in addition to having these business benefits I talked about, but actually benefits to the oyster crop. Very quickly, I've spent the last 4 years, I'm entering my fifth year growing kelp, but growing kelp all around Long Island in these different estuaries, figuring out different systems to grow it, and whether it be shallow water or deep water, measuring the growth, and then measuring the potential ecosystem services and nutrient bioextraction provided by these different grow methods. One thing I want to point out, and this is not really, this is something that's probably obvious, but just like oyster farming, there's good areas and bad areas. So as you're considering places to grow, seaweed in Florida, definitely take a geographic perspective and try different areas. But this is just showing some of the sites around Long Island growing. This is all that time of the harvest, and you can go from kelp being 12 feet long and over 10 pounds per foot of line. You're looking down at the picture of the bottom right in an area that's a lot more nitrogen limited, having very poor growth and paled colored kelp. But there's definitely a wide range of, depending on where you grow, it matters a lot. Some of our best yields, I just put this up to show, we've grown kelp, and this is in shallow water too, but kelp up to 12 feet long, up to 11 pounds per foot. Which is really just a massive amount of biomass that can be produced in 5 months. And if you want, just wanted to show this here to give you a perspective of a 12-foot kelp blade. This was grown in 2 feet of water off Long Island. But my point is here, you can, with this species, grow an incredible amount of biomass, which is great for nutrient bioextraction if you're considering that. These are just some calculations of a mock farm design with the yields that we've got. But on a 1 acre farm, you know, we could put 40 200-foot kelp lines at 5-foot spacing. I've done that. I haven't put 40 in, but I put the lines at 5-foot spacing, which is fine. We've gotten 11 pounds per foot at peak biomass. So that's in one season on a 1 acre farm, can produce up to 88,000 pounds of kelp per acre, which is just kind of mind blowing. And converting that to nitrogen, that's 166 pounds of nitrogen. And on Long Island, you know, nitrogen is one of our, too much nitrogen going into our coastal waters is really the core of all our water quality problems. And a lot of work is being done on land to reduce this nitrogen inputs, including in Suffolk County, which is mostly septic systems, but mandating that septic systems be upgraded to these innovative alternative septic systems that remove nitrogen, which are quite expensive. But just to do the conversion of what that 166 pounds of nitrogen means, that's the equivalent of 14 of these innovative alternative septic systems on homes. And again, that's just 1 acre, and that's in 5 months, over a 5-month growing period. But the consideration, the other consideration I just want to bring up with all this is when you can grow that much biomass, what the heck are you going to do with all of it? Our bottleneck right now is processing. So it's great as a farmer to be able to collect some kelp, go to a restaurant and sell it fresh. A lot of benefits there. Besides the extra revenue, it's really, you know, great for building relationships with your chefs and your customers. It's a new product. The chefs get very passionate about it. So really, in that way, cross marketing helps the oyster business. But there's only so much you're going to be able to sell fresh to local restaurants and chefs or even distributors. And we're still left, you know, with tens and tens of thousands of pounds of what to do with. And of course, seaweeds, you know, cannot be, they go bad pretty quick. So they got to be shelf stabilized either through drying or freezing. So the processing end is labor intensive. You know, I'm doing it the good old fashioned way by hanging kelp in a greenhouse I have out at Southampton. But this really, again, it would be very hard to scale. And so the processing end is where our bottleneck is at. We know we can grow it. We can grow a lot of it, but what are we going to do with it after we grow it? And I'll leave you off with that. But one of the things I do with my extra kelp is I put it in my gardens. And this is one of also the areas of research that we're investigating is using seaweeds as soil amendments, closing that nitrogen loop. So instead of adding new fertilizers to our crops, using seaweeds to extract nitrogen out of the water and then putting them on land. And so we have a lot of research going on with that right now, but I'm gonna end it there. Thank you.
Thanks, Mike.
Yeah, let me just figure out how to stop my share here. Well,
if you just like go down to the bottom and see where that
share. There we go. Yeah, it for some reason it moved to the top, but I just found it. There we go. Thank you.
Sure. Thank you. That was fantastic. I think now what we're going to do is we're going to bring Aaron and Loretta back up to the front and kind of bring this back home to Florida. We've heard about some examples where seaweed culture is active and ongoing in a larger capacity on throughout the US. And then we're going to talk a little bit, I think, Aaron, you're going to probably kick this off about this particular project and some of the business applications and market reality for the state of Florida and for some of these more subtropical and tropical systems.
Yeah, that's right. Am I still muted?
I can hear you.
Yeah, okay. Yeah, I've got a quick presentation, and everybody's presentation has been fantastic and illuminative. Michael, I was really happy to hear a lot of the things you said because I'm going to echo some of them. You're obviously farther down the road than 2 Shellfish is, but a lot of the questions that I have that I'll talk about in this presentation, you sort of touched on in your presentation. So without further ado, I've got a presentation sort of focused on what 2 is doing and what we're thinking about when it comes to the the seaweed business as a component of our overall business, some of the challenges that we see down the road, and some of the bridges that have to be crossed before, we can make this a viable business. So without going any further, and I'm going to share my screen, and we will start. So I'm hoping y'all can see that. So yeah, I've introduced myself already, but I'm Aaron.
Hey, Aaron, just put it in presentation mode.
Oh yeah. How's that?
Perfect.
All right, great. So yeah, I've introduced myself, but I'll do it again. My name is Aaron. I'm with a company called Shellfish. I'm also an adjunct professor at the University of Miami. I started farming clams in 2012, mostly as a hobby. 4 or 5 years later, it had turned into a full-time job. We farm mostly clams, a little bit of oysters in the Tampa Bay region and up off Cedar Key, which is farther north, up close to the Panhandle. We have a small hatchery and nursery. Our hatchery's over in Fort Pierce, Florida, and we have a little nursery in St. Petersburg. Why are we interested in seaweed? Well, we got interested in it, as I mentioned earlier, because we're already growing it. Every winter, it starts in late fall, right about now, and it lasts through late spring. We see it varies from year to year. There's really heavy blooms and there's less heavy blooms, but every year we see a bloom. Last year we had a particularly heavy bloom on our farm in Tampa Bay. The second week of January last year, our crew spent a week pushing a bloom of mostly Gracilaria off a plant of about 2,000 clam bags. The seaweed had rolled in 6 to 7 feet high on our leases. It was literally overhead for the divers. We use a variety of techniques to move it around the leases. We've built big seine nets. We just send divers down with draggers. We drag chains. We use the prop wash from our boats to push it around. We spend a lot of time and energy trying to get seaweed off of our leases. And for pretty obvious reasons. At small levels, a foot or so of Gracilaria rolling around on the lease is generally not a problem. But when it starts to stack up to 3 or 4 feet high, it reduces water flow, that reduces growth. When the spring rolls around and it starts to warm up, if you haven't kept up with your biomass, some of that oxygen comes out of the water as the temperatures rise, and a lot of that biomass will die, and it'll create like a layer of anoxic goop on the clam beds, and that kills animals, and it kills them in a hurry. It takes a ton of time and energy and money to take care of it, and we're removing tons of biomass from our leases every year. And as I mentioned earlier, as we started to grow our little business and started to have significant plants, we realized that this stuff has some potential value, and maybe there's a way to turn all this labor into something more than just a cost for our operation. I got to know Loretta through the University of Miami, and with Loretta and with our partners at Natuno, and with some of our friends at the University of Florida, over the last few years, we've started thinking about ways to make this something other than just a nuisance. So for us, when we start thinking about it, the first thing I think any grower thinks about is what species. Over the last couple of years, we've worked with Eucuma, which is the top picture. We've worked with Calupra, which is sometimes referred to as sea grapes. That's the middle picture. And we've worked with Gracilaria. And there's some other ideas that we've kicked around too, but those are the 3 for now we've worked on. And so that's sort of all, that's sort of the first question we've had is what species can we grow? Right now, we think that Gracilaria is the best candidate for culture in all our waters. All we've done with Calupra is kill it. We've had some success with Eucuma in that we can keep it alive for extended periods, but we really haven't been able to produce any biomass. It's taken a few go rounds with Gracilaria, but we've started to think we have a system for producing it in our waters that works. We've gotten some reasonably good results. We're getting in the wintertime 2% growth a day, give or take, and we're doing it with really limited input. So for now, we're focused on Gracilaria as well as Eucuma because we see the potential there. We're not sure Calupra is ever going to be a viable species in culture on our leases, but maybe down the road we'll revisit it. Like Michael was talking about earlier, though, we have a lot of questions about how we're going to market this stuff. And this is something I think that anybody who's considering seaweed is going to have to think through. There are a ton of potential market applications for it. Scott mentioned the fresh market, and that is for sure a possibility. With our shellfish business, we do occasionally get requests for seaweed. I'm just not sure there's enough demand in the restaurant trade in our area to build a business around. I mean, how many restaurants would buy it? How many markets would buy it? Who would distribute it? And I'll get into regulations going forward, but we're not sure how the regulatory universe would work if we were selling this as a fresh product. Again, there's a lot of applications for it, salads, soups. Calupra was exciting to us at the beginning because of the potential to manufacture vegan caviar. But we're not sure how big that market actually is. The aquarium trade, again, maybe. Here in Florida, the aquarium trade is a big business. I think it's the single largest sector of the state's aquaculture industry. And seaweed could be used in a variety of applications in a variety of kind of tanks. Again, I don't have a good sense of how big that market is. I don't know how it would get distributed, and I don't know how it would be regulated. I also don't know if it wouldn't make more sense if we were trying to service the aquarium industry if we didn't just pull the stuff wild off the leases and sell it that way in the wintertime. You know, there's the market for agar and carrageenan. There's some other derivative compounds that are sold to, like in the pharmaceutical and cosmetics industry. We know that as late as the 1970s, there was some small scale agar processing going on in Florida on the East Coast. They were using wild harvested gracilaria as a feedstock. But we don't know about that business either. I mean, it's a volume business. I've got a table there on the right-hand side that's from the latest FAO report on seaweed production. The amount of seaweed that's being produced in places like Indonesia is massive, millions of tons, eucuma and gracilaria. You know, I don't know that it's ever going to be possible for an American producer to get to these volumes, maybe. But there'd be a lot of questions about the regulatory environment, who would process it, who would buy it, and things like that. And there'd be a lot of questions about the costs to produce. I mean, I don't know that we could be cost competitive with producers in Southeast Asia. So perhaps that's a market, but you know, we're just not sure. There's fertilizers. I think Michael talked a little bit about that. Maybe. I've had some of the gracilaria we pulled off our leases tested. It is rich in micronutrients that gardeners and other agricultural users want, zinc, manganese, those kind of things. And I mean, there's already an industry set up around organic and seaweed-based fertilizers. So maybe there's some potential buyers out there that would be interested in having an alternative source of biomass. But I don't know. And I don't know what scale would be required to service those markets. And again, as always, I don't know who would process it. I don't know how the logistics would work. One market that we're very interested in here is feed additive for cattle. Red seaweeds, especially Asparagopsis, have high levels of bromoform. That has been shown to reduce methane emissions in beef and dairy cattle a lot. In some cases, the literature indicates as high as 90+%. Other papers show, you know, 30, 40, 50%. There are some companies that are working with it. A company called Blue Ocean Barns, which is in Hawaii, has developed a product they call Brominata, which has gotten a generally recognized as safe designation from the FDA. And apparently it works, and they're working to scale that business. Again, that's Asparagopsis. Gracilaria is a red seaweed. Maybe it has bromoform, but we don't know. We're going to find out. We've been working with our partners at Natuno and the University of Florida to have some of our gracilaria tested to see whether or not it has bromoform. And I think that is a potentially exciting possibility. It's a little bit under the radar for some people, but Florida is an enormous cattle producing state. I think we're actually only second to Texas. So if that was something that growers, you know, cattle producers in this state wanted, it might be something that we could provide. Obviously, there's regulatory issues. Bromoform is actually toxic, so the FDA is going to be involved in any feed additive that's being fed to cows. Again, processing and scale questions are out there. We just don't know. And then there's nutrient credits. Our regulators at the Department of Ag and Consumer Services, Division of Aquaculture, FDACS, they've recently started considering how to get nutrient credits to growers who are producing both shellfish and seaweed, and that's exciting. I think we don't have all the data. We don't know how much carbon, nitrogen are being taken up by the different species that are produced by growers in the state, so they'll have to generate some more data. We don't know how much the credits will be worth. I'm not sure if it'll be financially worthwhile. And I don't know what the paperwork would look like. And I'm a farmer for a reason. And then, so we have all these questions about markets. we love the idea of being in the space. We think there are applications, but all of these markets leave us with almost as many questions as answers. And we wonder about the regulations too. I think Michael mentioned it. I don't really know what a regulatory environment would look like for seaweed production. Is it food? If it's food, the FDA is involved, and there's going to be rules about heavy metals, other contaminants. There'll be rules about post-harvest handling and processing. There'll be a lot of things that we'll have to understand and be able to navigate if we're going to successfully harvest, process, and ship this product to any of the markets I just mentioned or any of the ones I haven't mentioned. Here in the state of Florida, we farm in what's called SHAs, shellfish harvest areas. Right now, I'm under the impression that seaweed production would probably have to occur in shellfish harvest areas. That's going to limit the amount of real estate available to do this. So if you're thinking about a more volume application for seaweed production, like agar or carrageenan feedstock, you're going to need a lot of real estate. I think there's 45 or 50 SHAs. In the map on the right, the blue lines are a rough representation of the lower Tampa Bay shellfish harvest area, 4802. That's not a huge amount of bottom. I think the state would want to, and I know Charlie and Portia are on this call, and maybe in the panel discussion we can talk about this, but right now FDAX believes, and probably rightly so, that they need to limit seaweed production to existing SHAs so they can monitor water quality and keep us out of trouble, which is understandable, but it would limit what is possible if somebody really wants to scale a seaweed business in the state of Florida. There's an issue with our programmatic permits. Right now, FDAX is authorized to, and this is actually a great thing that's happened recently. FDAX got a programmatic permit that allowed them to authorize seaweed production in the state of Florida. That just happened in the last year or so. But that programmatic permit limits the kind of gear that FDAX can authorize. And essentially, FDAX can only authorize pre-existing shellfish production gear to be modified for the use in in seaweed production. That could potentially limit innovation in different ways of going about cutting up the onion. I'm not clear whether or not, and it relates back to the SHA question, I'm not clear if seaweed could be produced in land-based flow-through systems like tank systems, especially if those flow-through systems were taking intake from an area outside an approved SHA. I don't know. And I don't know what would happen in the case of a harmful algae bloom. This is Central Florida. The map on the right-hand side of the screen actually shows you the current red tide status on the Gulf Coast of Mexico as of yesterday. The colored dots show bloom concentrations of red tide. If we're producing algae for a non-food application, are we shut down for red tide? Are we not? I don't know. If we're producing for a food application, are we shut down due to red tide? What about pyrodinium and some of the other harmful algae we experience here on the coast? What would make products safe and not safe? I mean, what are the standards? How would we predict and manage harmful algae blooms? So there are other questions I could go on forever about it, but the point is in addition to sort of wondering about the markets, we wonder about how we would be regulated if we tried to really turn the screws and scale a seaweed business here in Florida. There's some other challenges. Michael, you mentioned your impression that in Florida, things just grow all year round. Actually, not really. Every human being and animal in this state is miserable from July until the end of September, at least, because it's hot and muggy. It rains too much. We've killed a lot of algae in the summertime in the bay because it's just too murky and hot. We think that seaweed in Florida is mostly a fall through late spring crop, regardless of the species. The water's more clear, more photosynthesis, happier critters, less biofouling, things like that. I've been working with Loretta and her team on the ARPA-E grant for the offshore site, which she discussed earlier. It's not part of this Saltonstall-Kennedy grant, but it's another system. I've now pulled that rig out of the water 3 times in the last 20 months to get out of the way of hurricanes. We've had 2 in the last month here. I've also had to pull the offshore rig out of the water twice due to user conflicts, folks driving their boats through the rig and cutting it up and messing stuff up. And we have similar issues on our inshore leases in Tampa Bay with the Saltonstall program. And then expertise. We've gotten a lot of great help from Loretta, but she can't be here every day. We've gotten a lot of great help from Scott, a lot of help from Cliff, but they can't be here every day. And so we're figuring a lot of stuff out on our own as we go. We're making a lot of mistakes, trying not to make the same ones twice, but there isn't a great local ecosystem of extension that can help us with some of the questions we have. That loops back into our question about gear. We've tried ropes with clips, ropes with ties, ropes with tube nets, other systems. We're not 100% sure the best way to scale any kind of production, and we're gonna have to work through that when it comes to gear. And then we have the question, since we see it every winter, does it make more sense just to harvest it wild? Scott and I had a discussion about that Monday and Tuesday this week when they were on site with us, working on our Gracilaria and Yakima project here in Tampa Bay. So we've got a lot of other challenges and questions that we're thinking about as a commercial operation, and that's just a sample of some of them. In conclusion, despite all our questions about the market and what it looks like, despite all our questions about the regulatory universe, despite all the other challenges that we see out there, this stuff has a lot of value. And we think in the medium term, this is something that makes a lot of sense for growers in Florida. Michael, you mentioned it too. I hate the fact that I'm only capitalizing on the bottom 6 inches of my leases growing clams. I want to put the whole things to work. Our regulators have been great about giving us permission to use water column. So let's figure out a way to add production to our acreage out there in the bay. We're working with various partners, some of which I'll thank at the end of this, but we need to keep doing that research. And we're hoping that over the next year or two, our regulatory environment will become more clear and we can start to move forward with some of these questions we have. I need to thank NOAA for funding our work. I need to thank the Marine Biological Laboratory, Scott, Loretta, Cliff, Sea Grant. I think Leslie Sturmer's on this call. Angela set this whole thing up. Our regulators at the division have, I think in some states, people really have heartache with their regulators. We've got great ones. Sometimes they frustrate me, but 90% of the time, they've been really supportive and helped us move these projects forward. And our partners at Natuno have funded a lot of our work, and I need to thank them as well. And that's all I got.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Aaron.
Yeah.
Okay, from there, I think what I'm going to ask is for all of our presenters to go ahead and turn your cameras back on. And also, I'd like to invite our other invited panelists to kind of pop on if they want. Portia Sapp and Charlie Culpepper, whichever one of you drew the short straw, or both of you is great, either way. And then also Anushka, if you are available and able. Anushka, again, is the aquaculture extension specialist with Connecticut Sea Grant. And her focus is actually on seaweed aquaculture and seaweed processing and marketing. So she has a lot of input and perspective from the Northeast as well. So, we can do this. Probably the best way to do this with this number of folks is if you have a question, if you know how to use the raise the hand button down at the bottom, there's a little button that has a smiley face and it says reactions underneath it. It might be at the bottom, but wherever it is on your Zoom screen, it says reactions. If you click it, there's an option to raise your hand. So you can either do that, or we could try out if people just want to unmute, but sometimes that can get kind of cacophonous. So we might just want to try the raise your hand button first, but if nobody raises their hand, we can move on from there. So let's go ahead and open the floor. If anyone has particular questions for any of our presenters today, or just about the general viability moving forward for seaweed production in the subtropics and tropics, feel free to, broach that also.
You see there's a question in the chat. So can someone touch on the potential for seaweed die-offs of the tropics caused by stress, induced variations in salinity, temperature, fouling, predation, epiphytes, pollution, and siltation? I think I can say briefly that Aaron touched on this and that, we're still learning about what cycles those are in Florida and other places for our other sites with the DOE project. I think right now we really haven't seen evidence of disease, but certainly seaweed gets stressed when it gets warm. And unfortunately, the last couple of years, we've seen extremely warm summertime temperatures. And so what, Mike, you said we originally thought we could grow things year round, but as Aaron pointed out, those really warm July, August, September is really not doable for the present climate state that we're in, and will probably continue in the future. We haven't seen much predation in some sites except for this week. Aaron can talk a little bit more about that. But we do have issues in the tropics with epiphytes and biofouling. And I think it really varies from year to year and site to site. And as Mike mentioned, it's really a good practice to test multiple sites and at different seasons to see, what site does better and what species do better at that site.
Yeah, I can add on to that a little bit. I mean, with the Eucuma trials we've run, we were able to keep it alive and even see a little bit of growth, but it didn't grow great. And one thing we found was there was some fouling on it. With our gracilaria work last winter, we didn't see any fouling, no epiphytes. And I suspect that had to do with just the fact that it was growing rapidly. And we were able to harvest it and resubmerge it and then harvest it again. I agree with Loretta that the die-off issues we've seen have been not disease related, but environmental, just too hot, too fresh.
May I add on to that? Sort of building on some of the comments around kind of site access and testing out a few different sites to understand where things work and where they don't. I want to point out that that's often really hard for someone who's trying to enter into this enterprise in a commercial way. Unless you already have access to a site, you are growing shellfish and you're starting from there and can kind of work with other people and regulators. If you're starting from scratch, that's where we need the strong partnerships with the research community who can often kind of navigate that process in order to secure the approvals that are necessary to like lay that foundation and open the door for the commercial cultivation. Usually farmers are going through like a multi-month to a multi-year process to secure the leases, the permits, and all the approvals that are necessary in order to put their gear in the water. And you don't always know in that case, like how it's going to perform until you get to that point where you're farming. So like these kind of critical research partnerships are just really key and super valuable to helping to expose like where it might be possible to do, where it also might be economically viable. The one other point I wanted to raise, like thinking about economic viability and market opportunities, because Aaron, you were talking about that, like we can grow it or we can harvest it, the wild set, but like, what are we going to do with it? One way that we've kind of addressed this on the nonprofit side and working with people who are cultivating kelp in New England, the Gulf of Maine, on the West Coast in Alaska, GreenWave launched a program within the past couple of years that's really centered around value chain coordination. So we are doing like heavy, deep work with farmers, as well as trying to kind of develop markets and build connections between buyers and processors, so they can make those kind of transactions and relationships, and we can start to build the network and build the sort of domestic economy for seaweeds. Right now, so I'll share in the chat, I guess, when I'm done commenting, like the tool that we developed and the program that we developed is called Seaweed Source. So I just added a chat to the comment. And you can access a little bit of the basics through our website, and you can apply as a seaweed grower to take part in that program through kind of participation in the hub. We've really focused on kelp so far, but I think that if there's demand for kind of that value chain coordination across other species and other markets, that there's an opportunity to expand that programming to other areas. So I'd love to chat about that with the folks on this call at some point.
Yeah, let me just, Kendall, thank you. The first thing you said about the fact that this enterprise requires essentially a lot of failure. You got to figure it out. There's no way that Two Docs does any of this without help from NOAA, Woods Hole, our partners at Natuno. We've had the opportunity to make a lot of mistakes without having it hit our bottom line. And that sort of support has been invaluable. It speaks to the network you were talking about. Looping back to the second half of your comments, yeah, that's great. You know, any help we could find connecting with people who could buy this stuff and help us put it to work would be awesome. So thanks.
Sheila, go ahead. I see you have your hand up. Sheila, everyone is from Tampa Bay Estuary Program.
Yeah, thanks, Angela, for putting this all together and for all of the speakers. Really interesting stuff. And I definitely see a lot of potential here in Tampa Bay. I guess I'm a seagrass biologist and I run the seagrass monitoring program for Tampa Bay, and lower Tampa Bay, especially around Rattlesnake Key, typically has really productive and stable seagrass beds, as well as other critical estuarine hard bottom habitats, which are really essential stopover places for fishes as they migrate in and out of Tampa Bay. So just keeping that in mind, and because I am a habitat ecologist, I didn't really hear any of the speakers talking about the impacts of these macroalgae farms on the submerged aquatic vegetation in their areas. So I'm just wondering if anybody was studying kind of like the impacts to those habitats, and either like right under the farms or around the farms.
I can answer really quickly and let someone else go. For our siting at all the sites in Florida and Puerto Rico, et cetera, we specifically avoided seagrass areas or coral sites, and just to avoid any potential endangerment or conflicts. But we do know that through our partnership with the Nature Conservancy, who work with the seaweed farmers in Belize, that they have grown seaweed over, and this is again red seaweed, not the 12-foot long kelps that Mike showed us, but they found very little impact on the seagrass bed below the farms.
Yeah, I can tack on a little bit to what Loretta said, Sheila. We are required to, our leases are limited to sand bottom only. We've got buffer zones between our farms and any seagrass area. FDACS checks everything very carefully, as well as we do, before any leases are authorized. So we're only doing this over essentially sand bottom. I can tell you that in our area, I know Rattlesnake Key pretty well. I grew up in Bradenton. We're near Bishop Harbor, and we see these red seaweed, this gracilaria, and all these other blooms roll in across the grass flats everywhere. You know, all the stuff that we've grown so far as gracilaria wise, we've just used wild propagules to grow, and it's all rolling across the leases and the seagrasses wild. And we see the same pattern on the flats that we see on our leases. It comes in the winter when the water gets clear, and it's gone by the summertime.
Okay, Charlie Yerish, and then Charlie Culpepper, you're next.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention when we had the pandemic and the supply interruptions, the global supply chain, it was quite evident that the auger industry was in desperate straits. And that's a low-hanging fruit for folks in Florida right now, either through wild harvesting or for cultivation. And I would urge to run some auger analyses. I was quite surprised that the auger that we had from the farms in Long Island Sound actually was food grade auger. I put the paper in the chat. The techniques as well are listed there. That is a low-hanging fruit. So if you have a large quantity of wild harvestable material, follow through on doing that. There is a North American need right now for auger. The biotech industry also wants it, in addition to the food industry. So that is something that I would urge folks to look at very carefully for the state of Florida. I also put some other references there because I think it's important to see peer-reviewed literature from all of the scientists here. So there has been a good body of work that will help Florida and develop its aquaculture industry.
Yeah, thank you. And just so you guys know, for everyone that's on this call, I will compile everything in the chat and forward it out. So don't feel like you have to try and get them all copied and pasted. I'll make sure that I send an email following the workshop with all of those links. Charlie Culpepper, I noticed you had your hand up and then it's down. Did you want to say something? And then Leslie, I see you.
Well, sure. I was going to chime in, but actually Aaron nailed the question. So Aaron knows our rules. It's always great to hear our farmers say what I was going to say anyway. So yeah, the simple question is, about seagrass impacts. No aquaculture leases in Florida can be sited on any natural resources is the short answer. So like Aaron said, sand and mud bottoms only. So in terms of direct impacts, there would be none. I guess while I'm on real quick, Aaron had several points I'd like to touch on, which one was, yes, you can grow seaweed in upland recirculating or flow through systems in Florida. We have folks doing that with seagrass and some microalgae currently. So we have, you can work with the Division of Aquaculture to permit any commercial upland facility like that. And we do have a streamlined process for intake and discharge for facilities, especially like a seaweed where there would be no input. We do have a process in place for that. And then the last thing I wanted to touch on with another thing that Aaron mentioned was, yes, we did modify our state programmatic general permit recently to allow macroalgae to be cultured within already approved gear. But what we've been working on, easily 3 years now, but I think we're getting very close, is actually approving some submerged longline systems within our programmatic general permit. So that to us is really going to open up the possibility, even for research and demonstration, which Loretta and Aaron, I believe it was 2 or 3 years to get an individual permit for your project just to see if this works. So we're really excited that we would have, it's going to have some limitations on it in terms of size and density. Like you touched on, Aaron, there is a need for innovation, but that individual permitting route, I think, is always still going to be there for larger farms and things like that. We're considering it's a brand new type of industry in a brand new area in the country. We're excited to make any kind of general permitting success with suspended longline systems. So stay tuned. We'll be glad to announce that to everyone within this group as soon as possible.
Yay.
Thanks, Charlie.
That's cause for celebration for sure. Leslie, go ahead.
A question and then just a comment. So Anushka, I think in talking to you in the past, you are also doing land-based rearing of seaweed, and I'll let you answer, and then I do have a couple of comments of some history here in Florida as well.
Hi, Leslie. I haven't seen you in a while.
I know.
Hope you're well.
Thank
So
you.
there's very small scale production of gracilaria in tank-based systems at the Bridgeport Aquaculture High School. And that was a partnership with UConn, specifically Dr. Yarish, where high school students learn the entire soup to nuts process, the cultivation, the processing, and then the retail side. So while in the state of Connecticut, at the moment, there's no approved open water cultivation of gracilaria for several reasons. Again, the Bridgeport Aquaculture High School is selling their gracilaria, their native strain of gracilaria for human consumption as a food.
Great.
Okay, thank you. Florida does have a history of seaweed, at least research. It's all land-based. Actually started with John Ryther and Dennis Hanasak over there at Harbor Branch Oceanographic Institute. And I know Dennis has looked at several species, and again, all in land-based cement tanks. And I don't know if we've reached out to him to find out what some of those species were, or if even if he's continuing on in that line of work. I also put in the chat a link to a dashboard, a survey of consumer acceptance results from Atlantic Corp. They just released that. It's a really interesting way they presented the survey results pertaining to farm-raised seaweed and consumer acceptance and preferences. Great presentations, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Leslie.
Thanks, Leslie. Hey, Leslie, did you hit send on the chat? I'm not looking. I'm looking for that link. I just wanted to make sure. Oh, okay.
A little bit earlier.
Okay, gotcha. Thank you. Thank you. I'm doing the awkward pause so that those of you out there that might have some questions, don't be shy.
I'm sorry, I can't locate my raise hand button, so I'm going to interrupt if that's okay.
Yeah, that's great. Hi, Dominique.
Hi. I have two questions. One, the first concerns insurance. I know that there's a lot of business and research and development going on. So I'm wondering if anyone has had an opportunity or has had experience with insurers, either crop insurance or extreme weather insurance. And while there is development, a push for development in the industry, is it possible to arrange for, I suppose, pilot studies with insurance products?
Dominique, I guess, and maybe Michael from Stony Brook can jump in on this as well, or maybe Scott from the commercial side. Insurance for shellfish producers, and at least in my experience, is yes, I have some experience with it, and not much of it's good. We don't have very good crop insurance. We have a program called NAP, which provides some limited coverage. Mostly you're limited to coverage for named storms. Leslie Sturmer might be able to jump in on this as well. It's pretty limited coverage. The payouts are pretty low. It's got to be a pretty extreme event. I think there's some coverage for seed losses and things like that, but we don't have really good insurance. I've got some friends in the insurance business who've talked to me about the difficulty of underwriting shellfish farms, the potential for fraud, et cetera, et cetera. So I get it. But yeah, insurance is something that would certainly help our industry. And I think a lot of the same insurance related issues that plague us on the shellfish side would ultimately need to be addressed if the seaweed industry really starts turning the screws in the state as well. It's tough for us on the insurance side. We roll the dice a little bit more than other producers.
In the 2018 Farm Bill, algae was put in the Farm Bill. And in the 2019 and 2020 appropriation, there was money in there for algae crop insurance, both micro and macro. And so you have to work with your county extension agents to take advantage of that.
Just a further comment to reflect on how difficult it is to try and even acquire some of these USDA funded crop assistance programs. For a new crop such as seaweed, they would require, Farm Service Agency would require data from several existing farms before they would even consider including it in the NAP program.
So what kind of data is that? Production, Leslie?
Yes, growth, survival from several farms. Yeah. They're not, yeah. I wouldn't say they're hard to work with, but
I would.
Yeah, okay, maybe they are.
May I add a little bit of perspective? And Mike, I really want to hear kind of your experience too. What we've seen on our side is kind of the same, like, yes, algae is in the Farm Bill, making it possible for farmers to access crop insurance, but I don't know any farmers who have crop insurance, or at least none who are growing seaweeds. I do know farmers who maintain like a liability insurance for their business and a small insurance package that makes it kind of possible and is necessary in order to sell their products, say at a farmer's market or to restaurants and so forth, but not the type of protections that you might want to secure to like address, disaster, crop loss to disease and other things for all these reasons that folks are pointing out. Mike, what's your experience?
Just to follow up what Kendall said, that's right. We carry liability insurance. If a boat runs over somebody or somebody gets sick from a clam that was left out, yes, we have that. And that's pretty standard and straightforward. There's brokers that carry it. But crop insurance specifically is a nightmare.
Yeah, I mean, I'm just going to echo what was just said, but I'd never had crop insurance, and it's been a long time since I've looked into it. So I couldn't really even add anything as to cost or that. And I will tell you, workers' comp and liability, especially workers' comp, very expensive, very, very, very expensive. That's why a lot of employees a lot of businesses keep employees off the books, because the workers' comp is a killer. But I mean, accidents do happen when you're working on the water, so it is really important to cover your employees. So I had spent a lot of money on workers' comp over the years. The only one thing I would want to add was, and this is not something to count on for future disasters, but after Superstorm Sandy, which greatly impacted Long Island. There were funds, federal funds available through the small, I guess it was the Small Business Administration, which we were able to tap into to cover some of our losses. So programs like that following major catastrophes, and I'm sure Florida knows this a lot better than we do, but there was money to tap into. And this is going back to 2012, but it was a nice sum of money we were able to get to recover some of the losses we had for Superstorm Sandy from that. But yeah, as far as crop insurance, never had it.
I can jump in quickly and add in terms of at least the innovation side to be able to withstand the storms. That's something that we've been very conscious of because of where we're growing in Florida and Puerto Rico that are basically targets. As Aaron got hit twice this year. And in Puerto Rico, we had just put our large catenary system in the water when Hurricane Fiona passed 7 miles. I passed 7 miles south of our farm site, and we had no damage to the system. It didn't move at all and performed like it was supposed to. So I think there are ways to help get around this. And while we didn't get to test the biomass, how it would survive this, we think that being able to sink it down to the bottom where currents and waves are much, much less exciting than at the surface during these hurricanes, I think could really at least help mitigate some of those issues.
Is it practical to try to remove the majority of your systems from the water if a storm is approaching?
I'm the shellfish business. I think, like Loretta suggested, if you're in the seaweed space and you have systems that can be put on the bottom, that's a help. I think it's certainly something that anybody who wants to do this in a nearshore environment would have to consider. I think if you are operating at scale in a nearshore environment, you're not putting it on the bottom to get away from these. And, if I suspect that anybody who scales a nearshore operation, it's going to be like clams. You can't get 5,000 clam bags out of the water. It's just not going to happen. So I don't know, but I suspect that certainly in the nearshore environment, nope.
Okay, thank you for that. My second inquiry concerns our earlier question about where to direct your product. I am pursuing an avenue of research with another emerging market, and that is bison ranching. I have approached a university research center and a seaweed feed supplier to partner on a research study to understand if bison can be adapted to a seaweed or partial seaweed diet. And this is primarily because of the water footprint of terrestrial feeds and the water efficiency of seaweed feeds. And the bison sector, it seems, is very concerned with sustainability as it is emerging. And I think it's important, from what I gather, it's important to represent modern or future values in developing this new industry. And so it may become important to them to have a feed supply once the sector starts to grow and expand beyond what's, I suppose, grazable. If they are required to develop new feeding programs, then they will need a feed supply that is sustainable as well. So I wanted to introduce now the idea that seaweed-based feeds could be, and this is according to the supplier who's been in business for quite some time, nutritionally superior and cost-effective, and again, water efficient. And so this is my very early days of my investigation, but I want to know if I wanted to, I suppose, progress the research to the next stages. Is there a center for commercial development or market development or I suppose the bison sector has proposed that they may be interested in conducting research and funding research, but also, as this is to encourage the seaweed sector, where can I find funding for the seaweed research in terms of and the development of the product is the easiest part. It's already doable. The marine botanist that I've spoken to is familiar with the diet and familiar with the feeding cycles. So they already understand that there's a product that can be easily adapted to a bison diet. But to actually develop a full program, and the point of this is to match two emerging markets. Whereas cattle, for example, has established itself firmly with terrestrial feeds. A sustainable industry might be interested in a sustainable feed, and I want to marry the two emerging industries before terrestrial feeds becomes the automatic choice.
Thanks for that, Dominique. I'll let some of our panelists potentially respond to that, but I will also let you know if you're following the chat, there have been some resources placed into the chat in regards to that topic that might be useful to you. And then I'll kick it back out to the panelists to respond.
Well, I can tell you that the University, Penn State University has an active program right now on animal feeds, as well as University of California at Davis. Seaweeds are right in the center of the portfolio. They're not only working with the so-called miracle seaweed, Asparagopsis, they're also working with other seaweeds, especially ones that are warm, temperate, and tropical. And so there is a literature, Dominique, that's out there, and I could put a couple of papers for you in the chat, which I will do, and you can see where to start. The other aspect has to do with funding. SBIR programs, both phases 1 and 2 from USDA and NOAA, are very good grant opportunities. Even now, NSF is encouraging their participants to go and work with companies, and they have SBIRs too. So there is information out there. There are funds out there. You have to partner up with an academic institution and go after it.
I'll add anecdotally, I used to work out at Catalina Island in Southern California, where there is a native or introduced bison population, and they regularly go down to the beach and munch on washed up seaweed. So they like it.
So I'm just going to jump in here for a second on the Sea Grant side of things. I don't know how much of the audience is already aware that Sea Grant actually has a seaweed hub, and I thought some of those resources might be useful to the conversation in this call. And so for those of you that aren't aware of it, I wanted to toss the ball to Anushka and have her kind of give a little bit of an overview of some of the resources that Sea Grant might have that might be useful.
Hi, thanks, Angela. So Sea Grant has 11 aquaculture hubs that were funded in 2019. There's the National Seaweed Hub. That's a collaboration of 11 Sea Grant programs and their stakeholders working together to identify challenges across 9 different stakeholder sectors, and then identifying commonalities, forming work groups, which are diverse stakeholder work groups. So everyone works together to, come up with a pathway or strategy forward on, how to address certain challenges. And just wanted to highlight one of the work groups, the regulations work group, has been working on addressing food safety and figuring out the different pathways where seaweed fits. And so seaweed is a RAC, a raw agricultural commodity. In Connecticut, we developed guidance back in 2020, but it's project starting from 2012. We've been working on seaweed food safety in Connecticut, and we've always considered it a raw agricultural commodity. because our farmers are pretty much selling it in its fresh form, and that's considered a raw agricultural commodity. But as a RAC, there's certain food safety guidelines and what farmers, different regulations farmers have to adhere to. And so the regulations work group led by the National Sea Grant Law Center is developing this document, looking at comparing where seaweed fits in under seafood HACCP versus FSMA preventive controls. And so that's going to be a great document when it should be coming out hopefully by the spring, by the end of spring, early summer, where again, it's just something that a farmer can look at and say, well, I'm doing this one product, but if I want to transition into say processing, these are the steps that I would have to follow. So stay tuned, that's coming up because it's I think something that as farmers, at least the ones I work with, you know, they're very limited because especially in Southern New England, since we're selling it in its fresh form, it's a very short harvest season, so 2 months. And so farmers really want to extend the shelf life of their seaweed. There's challenges with that because we don't really have commercial scale processing facilities or safe storage facilities long-term. And that really limits market accessibility. So these are some conversations, again, that have been coming out of the Seaweed Hub and regulators are talking with farmers and saying, well, what can we do? Also wanted to highlight that there's other aquaculture hubs. The main aquaculture hub has a seaweed component to it. The the Western Aquaculture Hub, or the name, I think it's led by Washington Sea Grant, and they have a seaweed component as well. So there's a lot of Sea Grant programs, including the National Sea Grant Law Center, that are looking at the policy side of seaweed that have a lot of resources available.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right, esteemed panelists, are there any final comments or any closing remarks or discussion you'd like to move forward with? We blocked off a large chunk of time for this workshop because we thought that the discussion might be one of the most useful portions. So I wanted to kind of kick it back to you guys and see if there's something else that you'd like to talk about.
Well, I could say Florida's got a very diverse coastline, East Coast, West Coast, and the Florida Straits. And you have a very good opportunity for seaweed cultivation. You also have a need for seaweed cultivation because of the people pressure, the nitrogen pressure that is coming from Florida residents, as well as coming from the Mississippi Delta. So I think the seaweed cultivation, along with shellfish cultivation, offers some unique opportunities for Florida. And I would urge you to bring in some other entrepreneurs to come up and really take the lead and look at product development with some of the known seaweeds that are out there right now. The low-hanging fruit are your gracilarias. And as I said before, there is a demand, and the supply chains were terribly interrupted. The price of augers went through the roof in the last 2 years. So if there is a suitable source, Florida would be able to capture the market.
Yeah, I can comment on our SK project. We're hoping to help advance some of this by doing some of the nitrogen testing in the water and the nitrogen content in the tissues of the seaweed, and hopefully answer some of those questions about can we use this for carbon credits or what the quality of that biomass is. And we also hope to leverage our offshore farm to get some data of, you know, seaweed quality and water quality outside of those shellfish harvesting areas. And I think, you know, Charlie was really, Charlie Culpepper was really helpful with, you know, offering to test some of our samples so we can get that data. And so we look forward to doing that as well.
Yeah, I'll just follow up and thank everybody for joining us and having the conversation. It's great to see all the interest and all the feedback. I think I certainly learned a ton today. So thanks for everybody that took the time to talk and everybody that joined us.
Yeah. Roizen, did you raise your hand? You can go ahead.
I did. It's Roisin. It's a
Oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's a crazy Gaelic name. I'm sitting here, actually a Fairfield, Connecticut resident and snowbirding in Florida. So familiar with both Northeast and down here. And wondering as a potential entrepreneur, because this whole thing fascinates me, and I followed Green Wave for a couple of years or more, and my son and my daughter as well. He's out in Washington State. She's in New York. We really would like to get involved in this, but like, are we years away from someone who does not have a shellfish farm or does not have a processing plant, or, you know, but money is there, but regulatory issues and you know, marketing issues and everything else, are we talking years away, or is there an opportunity for someone completely green to get into this?
If I could jump on that, just being from New York, and I'm sure it's very similar everywhere you go, but the first challenge is getting a piece of water if you want to get into aquaculture and getting a spot to do it. You know, in New York, there's public, because a lot of our, or I should say most of our underwater lands are public lands. So usually, you know, aquaculture happens through some type of public leasing program. And in New York, we have a couple. It gets kind of confusing in New York because the South Shore Bays are controlled by towns. The Peconic Estuary is controlled by Suffolk County. The Long Island Sound is state waters. So you're always dealing, depending on what body of water, it might be a different agent, different level of government, you know, that you're dealing with. But you know, if step one is to look at these public leasing programs and get on a waiting list, you know, and yes, it could take a long time, depending on how the leasing programs work. And I know there's a long waiting list in some of our leasing programs. If you're lucky, you might find there is a such thing as privately owned underwater lands. And if you're lucky, you might, you know, find that or know somebody that owns private underwater lands, and you could get going a lot quicker that way. You won't be dependent on these public leasing programs if that's the case. But then after that, your second hurdle is then getting the off-bottom culture permits, and that could be a process. It's been getting faster since when I started it, because now at the federal level, at the Army Corps, there's nationwide permits that cover shellfish aquaculture, and now even more recently, seaweed aquaculture. So that's really streamlined that process, you know. But with that said, still in New York, it could take, you know, upwards of 6 months to a year to get your full complement of permits at the federal level and the state level. You know, then your final thing is just, you know, getting you know, once you get a spot and you get your permits, it's starting a farm, and that could take some time, especially given that some of these crops may take a year to grow, or longer, you know, when you're talking with shellfish. So it can be a long, arduous process to get going, and it makes it makes a lot of barriers to entry to enter the aquaculture business. And you know, I would say, you know, for seaweed farming and the future of seaweed farming, and one thing I
Uh-oh. He'll come back and we'll let him finish, but because we're talking about the regulatory side of things, and I see that Portia's got her hand up, I'm gonna skip the order here and let Portia speak for a second. Mike, when you come back. Oh, Mike, you're back. Sorry, we lost you.
Oh, did I drop off?
Yeah, you did.
Oh my God.
It was in the middle.
I didn't even know I was talking the whole time. So sorry. I don't even know. Yeah, I'll end there, but I don't know what you heard or didn't hear. So I'll just, I'll drop it.
Okay, Portia, did you want to comment on that regulatory side real quick?
Sure. So I just posted in the chat our lease parcel availability maps, and you can go, it's a GIS map, so you can go in there and navigate, and it'll show you which parcels are available. So after a lease is terminated in Florida, we still retain those aquaculture parcels for use. So there are parcels that would potentially be available for somebody that wanted to get started. And we can issue those administratively. So that's typically able to be done within a month or shorter. And we are looking at production outside of shellfish harvesting areas. Currently with FDA, we've been talking with them about areas that don't have additional pollution sources, right? Because they're further offshore from the pollution sources that we're looking at for bacteria. And, you know, we're trying to figure out how we can get those not necessarily classified, but how we can allow culture there. So there's not necessarily anything preventing us from doing that. So that can move forward as well. So I think on the regulatory side, the big holdup is just the gear. So currently we're constrained to just the shellfish gear. And I think we're probably 3 to 4 years into our permit modification with the Corps. So hopefully we'll be wrapping that up, you know, within the next 6 months to a year.
Hey, Portia, can I ask you, if we can go outside the SHAs, does that mean the Corps is involved, or could you still do the authorizations without the Corps? I don't want to say gumming things up, but you know what I mean.
No, I mean, the Corps permit covers state lands in
Okay.
Florida, submerged lands. So the language in the permit mod that we put in was not specific for shellfish. Now there's other components that are specific to those harvest areas, but we can work to go outside of those.
Awesome.
Just the Cedar Key shellfish harvesting area extends out 9 miles. I mean,
Correct.
It's huge.
Yeah, Cedar Key harvest area goes all the way out to the state line. I think those are the only ones that do that.
Thank you for that. Anushka, go ahead.
Hi, so just also wanted to clarify, just make sure you're aware, the permitting process is very nuanced in terms of siting, and that's gonna, happen by state. It's very site specific. So even in Connecticut, we have farms that may be in the same town waters, but the permitting process was very specific to each farm. So it's very site specific because there's a lot of variables and there could be user conflicts. You have to figure out what's happening in the water column before you put any sort of gear in the water. But with that said, Connecticut we're pretty fortunate that we have very specific, but also very set and transparent guidance on the permitting process for all aquaculture, really for any sort of gear that goes in our coastal waterways. And then we also have food safety guidance. So we're pretty much set in Connecticut in terms of having a process in place. There are, of course, states like Washington, where the process is just all over the place. So I think it's really just going to depend upon the state and the specific site that you would like to farm in. But in terms of challenges, there's still a lot of challenges. It's still an emerging industry in most states. And just to give you an idea of just Connecticut numbers, but before I give you Connecticut numbers, there's a great presentation on the Seaweed Hub's website called State of the States. And essentially that goes through most of the seaweed farming states. It's mostly based on sugar kelp, not really any of the southern states or Gulf of Mexico, states in Gulf of Mexico, but at least not yet. But it sort of gives you information about landings per state, the species that are produced, the overview of the permitting process, if that's available, and where the seaweed being produced is going. But to talk about Connecticut, the first farm went in the water in 2001. That was a Bridgeport Aquaculture High School. But then the first commercial farm went in the water in 2012. And actually there was 2 around the same time that went in the water. Since then, there have been 13 sites permitted specifically for seaweed, but only 3 farms have been active over the past 3 years. And so that has a lot to do with some of the challenges related to access to markets, very short growing season, lack of processing facilities, long-term safe storage, and even in some cases production, access to seed, but also weather. related challenges. So, again, we're not where shellfish is, right? It's still new, but there's a lot of great work happening across the country, a lot of great research, a lot of great work that nonprofits are doing, that Sea Grant's doing, just to try and move the industry forward. But you always have to say, or I always challenge people, when you're starting a business, seaweed or any sort of aquaculture is a business, right? And so, have a good business plan. Make sure that you have really an enterprise budget and a plan over the next few years in order to be successful. So just, things to consider, if you want to be any sort of farmer, have backup plan, but essentially, have that market, secure the funding, make sure you're, economically viable and economically independent, because a lot of right now, in some states, some of the farms are subsidized and being supported by subsidiaries. So that's just, again, just some food for thought.
I want to interrupt one more time. Can anybody speak to the federal program? I think it was the end of last year. There was an open call for comment on certain legislations for the federal program, and the overarching study of the federal program is to decrease the seaweed deficit. And so I would imagine this means that built in the federal program will be ways to accelerate or facilitate the smooth implementation of new farms as I suppose, as an undergirding of the state systems or the state structures or businesses. So has anybody had an update or has any knowledge of where the federal program is in its development?
Charlie or Loretta or Scott?
There's the aquaculture opportunity areas that would be for offshore waters that would fall under federal programs, and they're meant to help facilitate. But I don't know that any project has really taken advantage of that yet, or if they're really implemented yet.
So the federal programs only relate to federal waters. They don't relate to the development of U.S. aquaculture as a whole.
Right, that's correct.
NOAA is working on the plan right now. It's out for comment, and so it's probably will be coming out anytime for more public view. But it has been circulating with different state and federal agencies.
Okay, great. Thank you, guys. Just because I didn't say it verbally later, I know you see at the top of your screen, it says recording, but so everyone knows this presentation has been recorded. If you have said anything that you are uncomfortable with being in the world, definitely send me a private email and let me know that you would like me to edit your portion out. But otherwise, I will make this workshop public so that folks can click a link and be able to watch the presentations for those I know there are a lot of people that wanted to join today and were not able to make it. So this will live forever online. So take this as your notice if you would like me to edit anything out before I post it. That'll probably happen next week at some point. And next week at some point, I will also make sure to send all of the links and communications that we've had in the chat so far, so that you guys can digest that at your own rates. And then I'll also share contact information for all of our panelists today as well. And with that, I am going to let Aaron and Loretta go ahead and land their plane here. And go ahead, guys. I'm going to throw the mic here.
I think I already thanked everybody for showing up. And Angela, thank you for putting everything together and moderating. Awesome job. Appreciate you. Appreciate everybody else being here. Angela put up my phone number. I've chatted with a few people directly. Feel free to call me anytime. If I don't answer, I'm on the water, but I'll get back to you.
Yeah, I'll just second that too. It's been great to have this discussion and look forward to further development and learning more as we have things in the water and learn more about Florida waters.
Yeah, and stay tuned because these guys are still working on their NOAA SK, and I suspect there's more research to come in this area. So this is a topic that we'll probably just continue to be discussing for quite some time, and it's only going to get better. So on behalf of everyone here, any closing remarks from anybody else on our panel? I want to give you the opportunity. Okay, awesome. I'm so glad that everybody joined us today. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to speak and share your expertise. Thank you everyone who's on the call for listening and for asking questions and making the conversation worthwhile. And stay tuned for an email from us moving forward with more information and with links to all of this great stuff that we talked about today. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving next week.
Many thanks, Angela. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Thanks, Angela.
you.
Thanks, Angela.
Bye.